me take just a moment to welcome you to class and to this interview on spiritual IQ with Dr. John Savage. Dr. Savage is a former consultant with Lead Consultant, a company that he started many years ago. In the last few years of his life, he turned his attention towards spiritual direction. And it was during that time that he wrote this book, Spiritual IQ. This is one of the books for the class that you're reading, and I will be interviewing Dr. Savage in just a moment, and he will be sharing you some of his thoughts about spiritual IQ and the steps that it takes to become spiritually mature. So I hope you'll sit back and listen and take some good notes because you're getting it directly from the author. Dr. Savage, I'd like to start out with a question. What motivated you to write a book about spirituality?
I have been working in the field of both emotional intelligence and also in working in helping people with their spiritual lives, called the spiritual director. I've been doing that for years.
Right.
And I thought I would put down some of the learnings that I've had, but mostly I was motivated because people both in my own congregation and from other denominations and belief systems seem to have really conquered their relationship or managed very well their relationship with God. And so I started interviewing people that I identified as spiritually intelligent people. And that's the question I would have, your students take a look at. How are they spiritually intelligent? And what does that mean? How do you identify that? So that the spiritual intelligence, after interviewing, I had a very small sample, Dr. Waltrud. I only had 26 people in this, but each one was from a different belief structure in the sense I had Southern Baptists, I had United Methodists, I had Presbyterians, and I had 26 different Christian orientations, from some very conservative belief systems to quite liberal to liturgical systems such as in the Episcopal Church. And one of the things that really startled me as I got working on that and interviewing these people is that they all had the same 7 characteristics. And it didn't matter if they were conservative or fundamentalist or liberal or whatever, they all had these 7 characteristics that I finally wrote down and worked at. And I thought, okay, then it doesn't matter what religious orientation you're in, you can have spiritual intelligence regardless of that orientation. I found that really fascinating.
Yes, it is. What do you mean by spiritual IQ?
Well, it's the IQ originally came from an intelligent quotient.
Quotient, okay.
What the two letters mean. Mm-hmm. And it's the characteristic of one's intelligence in that particular field, in this case, spirituality. Now you can have, and there's many books written on emotional intelligence, but there aren't very many written on spiritual intelligence. So I thought I'd give it a try.
Okay, thanks.
Let me finish.
Yes.
Your question. What's the difference between being intelligent and being stupid? Intelligence is the ability to know. The deepest intelligence is to know something without knowing why you know it.
Okay.
It's an insight. It's the ability to be aware of, pay attention to a particular process or subject, or in this case, your own spirituality. Namely, basically opening question on spiritual intelligence is, tell me about your prayer life. And that begins to give me very good clues of one's relationship with God.
Right.
Now, there are two words here, Dr. Watford, that I want the group to contemplate about. And that is, how do you know what you know? How do you know when you know something? You want to try playing with that with me for a minute?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. How do you know when you know something?
One way is that I can recall it.
Okay.
That I can recall the information around it, or I can recall the experience around it.
All right. So it's something that you can repeat.
Yes.
Something you could tell over and over, you're saying. Okay. Anything else? I surprised you with a question. We didn't rehearse this.
Yeah, you're turning the questions back on me. That's okay though. I guess you can, one of the ways you know that you know something is that when you share it, other people also know it.
Okay. Assuming they also know it. I mean,
Yes, right.
Knowledge at that point. Okay.
And I guess you could take it a step deeper and say, how do you know something when no one else around you knows it?
Yeah, well, then they either think you're bright or crazy.
Oh, okay.
One or the other. Okay. The ability, it's how people answer the questions I ask during the interview. And one of those is, and it's in the book, is what do you believe about God?
Mm.
Now, here, I don't know which way this goes for you. Are you more theocentric or Christocentric? Instead of saying what you believe about God, what do you believe about Jesus? That would be Christocentric, Christ-centered. And the other would be theocentric, which would be talking about God more than you talk about Jesus. If you reflected on that for yourself, what would you say? Or are you pretty well balanced?
For myself, I'm well balanced in terms of talking about God as the Father or God as the Son, Jesus, or as the Holy Spirit, because I think that balance is shown forth in life itself.
Okay, I think that's true. But if you listen to people, they almost always have a given emphasis that they would, when they talk about God, they speak of God, but don't talk so much about Jesus. On the other hand, I have people who talk nothing but about Jesus. And
Right.
they never talked about God as God in their language. They didn't pray to God, they prayed to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And that's okay, because we consider that equal. It's just a different set of language.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I'll turn that off.
Hello, my name is Sophie, and this is a follow-up connected to help SAMSUNGSN.
Excuse me. I'm going to turn this off. The other thing, Dr. Watford, is that the person has the ability to articulate what they believe. And they're clear about that. They're firm. They can affirm their own belief system. And that became one of the most important elements in my interviews. And most of the time, I did not have to ask the person what they believed about God. They self-initiated it.
Right. In your first chapter, you talk about their own personal story. So you're saying that they were able to clearly articulate their story?
Yes, very. Yep, that was one of the key characteristics. They could tell their own experience of God or Christ.
Right.
Okay. And it was not in doubt. It was as much a part of their language as talking about their children. Okay.
Right.
And I found that delightful, that people knew God at that intimate level and could tell about it and were willing to tell about it. And it took very little to ignite the conversation or the language of it.
I've known people who have the God language or religious language just becomes all that they know and they can say. And you're not talking about that kind of person, because you can go into some churches and if you don't know the language, you're lost.
Yeah. Now I'm not talking about church language.
Right.
I'm talking about personal relationship language.
Okay.
Okay. And that may be within the church or may not be there. It's basically the experience people have with God, and what shape does that take? How does it show up? How do you know they have it? Okay.
Okay. In your book, you talk about praying deeply. What do you mean by that phrase?
It's a form of spiritual intimacy, of being close to knowing about God because you've had the experience of it. Okay. And the intimacy or being close involves that it has a familiarity in the sense of, are you close to your wife, Randy?
Right.
And if you say yes, I could say, how do you know that? Try it. I'm putting you on the.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. How do I know that? Well, one, we love to do things together. Also, we've been together so long, it's been over 42 years, that many times we know what each other is thinking almost before we say anything. We know each other's habits. We know.
You can start a thought and she'll finish it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There's familiarity with that, with God, that one is always aware of God's presence. I'll put it that way.
Does that come with the longer someone has had a life with the Lord or with Christ or with God? Is it developed over a long period of time, or is it something that people get right off in the?
Well, I'll put it this way. Let me use the parallel.
Okay.
What have you learned about your wife in the last 42 years as over against when you first fell in love with her? It's different, isn't it not?
Yes, completely different.
Yes. Well, that because it grows, it develops, it matures, it has more experience to it. It has a way of understanding the nature of God. You read more about other people's experiences. and begin to understand that, so that the mature Christian tells their experience of God, and it is healthy. It is not crazy stuff, but it's a healthy relationship that perpetuates itself in the events of your life. And I'm a spiritual director. That's one of the things I love to do, probably more than any other single thing, is that I like to work with people on their spiritual life. And I was working with a woman just recently who was having trouble with her prayer life. And I said to her, do you have a prayer place? Do you have a place where you pray? That when you go there, you automatically connect with God. It's called a religious place. And she didn't. I don't often tell the people I work with about mine, but I told her about mine because it's really an unusual place. Yeah. It happened this morning. It happens every morning. And that is when I step into the shower. That's right. My prayer place. The moment I step into the shower, turn the water on, I go, hi, God, how are you? Let's talk. And our conversation begins.
Is that what you mean by dialogue with God?
Yeah, that's dialogue. The ability to not only talk or share or request or whatever you're doing with God, but also to hear the response you get, to hear God's voice, so to speak. And I've been able to do that for many years. And that it doesn't mean you cannot be spiritually intelligent and not hear the voice. I just find it very intimate and close, and we've had marvelous conversations. I can ask God anything, okay? God doesn't always answer my question.
Right.
Okay. Like, God, give me the model for curing cancer. I'm not going to get the answer to that one.
No.
Okay. But it's a type of emotional closeness as well. There's a lot of emotion involved in this. It's the feeling of presence. For example, when a person dies, if a person tells me my mother died this morning, I've had the experience of going and talking to God and saying, how is this person doing in the spiritual transition from being in a human body to a spiritual body? And I always get an answer to that. And they're always good. They always work out very well. And since all of us transition back to God, and it's the language I like to use is wonderful. It's a marvelous experience.
In your book, you talk about meditation and reflection and contemplation. How are those different from dialogue?
Dialogue is virtual conversation. I speak, God speaks. It's like what we're doing now with each other. We can talk to each other. Okay. Meditation is usually dealing with some object. You pick a flower and you can meditate on the flower, its meaning, its purpose, why it's here, why you picked it, whatever. It's reflection is more intellectual. It has the capacity to inform you, to be a teacher.
Would that be like using scripture as a prayer tool?
Yes. Absolutely. And you can do both. You can do many things with the scripture.
Right.
You can meditate on it. You can reflect on it. And they are different. The meditation of the scripture would be its meaning for you. What does it say to you? Contemplation is to be able to find the deepest meaning for you and what it has to say to you.
Mm.
They're often very mixed, and they're fairly difficult to separate, as a matter of fact.
Over in the latter portion of your book, you talk about a place called Desert Time. Or what is spiritual desert time?
Oh, that's a good one.
I know we could spend 2 hours on that subject alone.
This last week, Randy, I did one of my lifelong interviews, that I do with older people.
Right.
And this person got telling me about what I call her desert time. Let me give you the characteristics. All of a sudden, the belief system that you used to have and relied on with God doesn't seem to work anymore. You don't get any response. God doesn't respond to you. It seems blank. God seems distant. It's usually produced by a cluster of life events that evoke strong emotion in you. In this case, she lost both of her grandparents within 2 days of each other.
Mm.
She was 10 years old when that happened. She is now 72 and has never gotten over that.
She's carried that with her for 62 years.
Yes, she has.
Mm.
And she misses them, and she can still cry as a result of that. And she has not integrated that. It has not become a part of her ongoing life. She keeps it separated. And then I discovered something, Randy. She keeps it in front of her.
Mm.
She never put it in back of her. And so I use the strategy that you may know of, that where you move the tragedies that you've had that are in front of you to in back of you. And now you're not stumbling over your past. And it's a marvelous device, and she did it very, very well, worked at it very well, and was freed from it. And the desert time is a predictable stage of maturing Christians that occurs approximately every 7 years. I have clergy who come to me I've had clergy who have said, I preach the gospel every Sunday and I don't believe a word of it. That's desert time.
Mm-hmm.
You're running on automatic. And desert time is a time of transition. It's interesting, Randy, that in the Gospel of Matthew, that there is a pattern of Jesus's ministry where he is with a group of people, usually teaching. He then escapes from their midst and he goes to the desert. He then comes back and he performs a miracle. In Matthew, that happens over and over and over again. It's an interesting pattern.
Yes, it is.
And the desert time is an enriching, renewing stage of your life in which you give up old ways of thinking about something and learn something new. And it's difficult because it is filled with grief. It is filled with endings and confusion. It's a stage when you just don't know anymore. You want to give up. You want to quit. But it's a marvelous stage of renewal if you'll go through it, particularly if you'll do it approximately every 7 years. Then you grow as a Christian.
Right. Is it similar to William Bridges, what he talks about in terms of transition, where you have to begin with an ending?
Right. And then a stage of confusion.
And then moving into the new beginning or the new event.
Very similar to that.
Yeah.
Now, he doesn't call that spiritual work particularly, but
Right.
but I know that book intimately. I've taught it for years, and it's marvelous material.
And I'm sure that some of that from that.
It's a transition stage, Randy. That's exactly what it is.
Right. And I'm sure that a lot of that brought you to the point of where you talk about desert time in terms of spirituality, because it is different in many respects.
Yeah, because the shift is your understanding of God.
Right.
I'm not as literal about God as I used to be. I have changed that. It's more understanding of something very special in my life. It's a relational shift to a more intimate relationship with God. And I find it fascinating because I find people have done it better than I have. And I think I've done it fairly well. But I find people that are just incredibly spiritually grounded. And it doesn't matter what happens to them. They have learned to, Dr. Watford, they go through the desert with some ease after about 4 or 5 trips. Because it seems familiar.
Yes.
The journey.
They've discovered where the oases are.
You're right.
Where to sit down with God.
Right. That's true. And it's the oasis, and it's the ability to be comforted in a time of trouble.
Right.
The Psalms make more sense to you. The scriptures make more sense.
Yeah.
You learn that God is present in everything, including the desert. God is very intimately close to you in the desert. But the problem is trying to find it.
Right.
And learning where that is.
The last chapter in your book, Dr.
You ever been in the desert?
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was going to ask you a question. No.
I was going to say that the last chapter of your book, you talk about, or maybe in the appendix, about how to develop your own personal spiritual development plan. And I know we need to kind of bring the interview to an end, but I'd like for you to share just a little bit with the class about how could they develop their own spiritual development plan.
I have a bias.
Okay.
Go find yourself a really good spiritual director.
Okay.
Someone who knows how to guide you through that. Most churches do not talk about that language of the spiritual director. I'm a trained spiritual director. I train spiritual directors. I am with a group of spiritual directors, 6 of us, Randy, that are from very different faith systems. And I have been with them every month except for December when we don't meet.
Right.
We are now in our 17th year. And we deal with the deepest part of our own spirituality when we're together. And we really get deep inside ourselves and where God is and where God isn't, and where God is affecting us and where we wish God was but isn't. And I love it. I come away enriched every time. And I think that I can be a very good guide to someone who is trying, particularly in the desert. I think I'm pretty good at working with people in the desert and helping them through that. And also creating the strategies, the place, the plan, the kind of content, the books to read, the scriptures, how to develop that. The plan always is scripturally founded, okay?
Okay.
It is always about their own personal experience of God. And many people don't have the language for that, have never learned, not even in Sunday school, the language of being intimately close with God. They learn about it with the scriptures and talk about scriptures, but they don't say, how are you doing with God? How are you and God working together?
That takes a lot of self-reflection internally yourself, and then it also takes a lot of transparency to be able to open up with others like that.
That's right. That's right. No secrets with God.
Yes.
There are none. You may as well admit it. Okay?
That's right.
God knows. God knows your mind.
Yes. Well, I know we could go on and talk for several hours about this subject, but I want to say thank you for coming on and doing just kind of an overview of your book and sharing with the class some of the things that motivated you to write this particular volume, and then also that sharing with us some practical things about how to develop your own spiritual plan and journey. And I really appreciate your time and the thought you put into this.
Okay. Thank you. And I appreciate the class, and I hope they find it helpful. If any of them would like to chat with me about their spiritual life, I would be more than glad to do it, Randy.
Okay, I'll put it up on the video so they can see your number at the bottom.